Hello everybody and welcome to Diablo Season 7, where there have been some very interesting Witch Doctor builds popping up. I've been playing a Witch Doctor this season, I've been enjoying it, but there are two major builds, one including the starter set that you get for completing like the seasonal journey stuff, which is Helltooth, and then there's Jade, which it got a significant buff because of one little ring that has been added to the game. Now, both are completely viable, and that's what's very interesting about it, is both are very competitive. I see a lot less people playing Jade because it takes a little bit longer to set up, because you don't have the gear from the start of the season like you do Helltooth. That being said, I think Jade is a lot more fun. Helltooth is a very passive build. Jade has a lot of buttons to push, takes a lot more skill to play, but both are equally competitive. So you could choose either one, and we're going to do a video on both of them, but this one is going to focus on Jade. Now, I must mention that this build is not hardcore friendly. If you're playing the Jade Witch Doctor, it is not hardcore friendly. You are likely going to die often. You're very squishy at times, and if you're playing hardcore, wouldn't do it. Like, I played hardcore last season as a demon hunter, and I could tell you straight off the bat, if I was running a build like this, would not play it in hardcore. It just is not friendly. So that's your first warning. Second, this does require a little bit of precision play and an actual, like, getting used to the build in order to play it. This isn't a pickup build that you could just run into Greater Rift 80 with. It's going to take a little bit of practice. So let's go over the gear. Obviously, the Jade set, right? That's going to be the things that you need straight off the bat. So helmet, shoulders, chest, gloves, pants, and boots. Pretty simple stuff here. Now let's talk about the set bonuses, because this is what is going to set up the gameplay version and then why we choose all the rest of the gear. So when Haunt lands, this is your two-piece. When Haunt, which is, by the way, just a basic dot, right? It's something that Witch Doctors have been using for a while. When Haunt lands on an enemy already affected by it, it instantly deals 120 seconds worth of Haunt damage. So basically, instead of reapplying the dot over and over and over again, you're instantly doing that damage. Oh, by the way, it also applies the dot. So it's really quite nice. 4-piece is Soul Harvest, which is this ability. Gains the effect of every rune, and has its cooldown reduced by 1 second every time you cast Haunt or Locust Swarm. Has a cooldown of 12 seconds. You can get it up very, very quickly. That sounded wrong. I meant your Soul Harvest. But there's a passive that will make sure that you're able to do that. Then, Soul Harvest consumes your damage over time effects on the enemy, instantly dealing 300 seconds worth of the remaining damage. So, you might think 300 seconds is a lot. Well, it is, considering Locust Swarm is 8 seconds, and Haunt is 12 seconds. So how do you get 300 seconds worth of damage? Well, that goes down to Creeping Death. Your Haunt, Locust Swarm, and damage amplification from Piranhas lasts almost forever. Now, the thing with this is there's a set amount of time that actually means. It's very vague, but there is a very set amount of time. All you need to know is that you can get about 5 Soul Harvests off, like back to back. It's about 5 to 6, if I recall correctly, where it will still have the dots on the targets. So you don't necessarily have to keep reapplying your dots. Now, that's key, because there are times where you will just be able to keep Soul Harvesting because of the 4-set, you're going to be casting Haunt and Locust Swarm, so you actually will be casting Haunt a lot. I'll talk about that in the gameplay. But because of this passive, which is gain 1% of your max life and mana, and reduces the cooldown of all skills by 1 second when an enemy dies within 20 yards. If you Soul Harvest, it deals the damage because it consumes those effects, kills a ton of things, your Soul Harvest can come right back up, and you could just repeat the process with all enemies that are around you. So there's a chance that, yeah, you can run into the effect of you actually removing your dots from the targets by just Soul Harvesting back to back to back to back. Another option here, and it's for speed builds, is to run the crap, I don't remember the name of the weapon. I have it around here somewhere. It's in the stash tab info. There we go. In Geom, that's right. So if your skill cooldowns are reduced by 10 seconds for 15 seconds after killing an elite pack, this is really good with this build for doing speed farms. You don't really need to know that, but if you're going to do speed farms, this is actually a pretty cool little trick, because then you can just run in, apply your dots real quick, and then just soul harvest to your heart's content, because that cooldown reduction is ridiculous. So that's the 6-piece bonus. You're going to need all 6 pieces. We're not running any Ring of the Royal Grandeur with this, but obviously if you're just starting the build, you're starting to get all the gear, you can run it and make sure that you have your 6-piece bonus, because that's where your damage is really going to come from here. As far as the rest of the gear, it all revolves around your soul harvest. So, for instance, your bracers reduces all damage taken by 6% for each stack of soul harvest you can have. By default, that is 5, stacked 5 times, as you see there. With this weapon, the Sacred Harvester, it now stacks 10 times. 6 times 10, you get the point. It's really good. And the fact that it also stacks 10 times, and this gives 3% intelligence for each affected enemy for 30 seconds, right? So, like, you just get a massive DPS boost, a massive toughness boost. It's crazy. So the Sacred Harvester and the Ornament are necessary. These are necessary. You can get away without using the Sacred Harvester for speed farming, and if you just don't have it yet and you have the rest of the gear, you can kind of get away with not having it, but you're not going to be at your full potential, and you're going to feel very squishy. This is actually a very hard weapon to get. Think like Fist of Astrak for the monks. You know, it is rare, but if you upgrade ceremonial knives, you'll eventually get it. We'll talk about stat priorities in a moment, but these set of bracers are fairly common, pretty easy. And then to go along with the ceremonial knife, you'll want Vile Hive, which the effect is Locust Swarm gains the effect of the Pestilence rune. I'll show you that in a second. And deals 60% increased damage. So Pestilence, whoops, wrong one, basically means that it spreads to an additional target. So it just is spreading faster. So because we get the effect of the Pestilence rune from our offhand, we're going to use Cloud of Insects, which means that enemies deal 25% reduced damage. Remember how I said that we're really squishy? That's really important to take. If you're not feeling like you're dying a lot, you're feeling pretty tough, you could probably take one of the other ones if you really wanted to. Right. So that's the mojo. Then you're going to run Unity, right? And obviously Templar is going to have another Unity on that. We'll show the Templar stuff in a second, but the Templar needs Unity, and the basically your follower cannot die, which means that he's going to be taking damage, but he takes 0 damage, which means any damage he takes is not put back on you with Unity, but any damage you take, half of it, so you're taking 50% reduced damage because half of it is going to him, but he can't die, so he takes no damage. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to run Unity. Again, we're squishy. We're going to run the Hunting Girdle. Haunt releases 1 extra spirit, right? So we're going to be, instead of just releasing 1 Haunt, we'll release 2 at a time, which is very, very good. It's good for AoE. And then the Compass Rose and Traveler's Pledge rounds off the gear on our character. So this is while moving, damage taken is reduced by 50%, but while standing still, damage dealt is increased by up to 100%. Now you see I've been standing here, so it is at 100%. This isn't inflicted on or affected by the character sheet. You don't see it on the character sheet, but I have 100% additional increased damage done by standing here. The moment I start moving, you see it starts changing until it gets down so that the other buff is up to 50. So now I have 50% reduced damage taken. If I stop moving, you see it starts changing again. So this is really key, and you'll see it in the gameplay stuff. But you got to know when to stand still and when to move. It's really important. This comes from practice more so than it does anything else. Standing still is very important, though. So that's the gear on the character sheet. As far as gems, Topaz are really, really good if you're having survivability issues. Put diamonds in there. The diamond in the helm isn't necessary. It does reduce the cooldown on everything, though, so it makes it a lot nicer. It's more or less just better to have because of Spirit Walk, and then we'll get to that in the skills section of this. But as far as weapon, you pretty much are always going to put an emerald in there. So again, stat priorities. Crit in the helm, so crit, int, stamina, or percent life, but you do want the crit on there. For shoulders, you want the haunt damage. Any piece that you can get haunt damage on it, do that. instead of Locust Swarm damage. So do Haunt damage, because that will be kind of our single target damage from the 2-piece, plus it also works with the dot effect. It increases the dot damage, which then increases our Soul Harvest consuming damage. Really important. With the gloves, we want pretty much int vitality, crit damage, and crit chance. Chest piece, we want haunt, and then int, and then vitality or percent life, whatever. If you can get anything else on there, cool, but you want that haunt damage. Pants, you probably want armor on there, int vitality. Boots, you want armor, int vitality. Do not have movement speed, you don't need it. You will put that in your Paragon points anyway, so it's useless. But then you want resist all if you can get it, or life regen, that's another good one. As far as the Soul Harvester, there's a lot of different things you can have on here. Mine isn't the best, and I have Vitality on there because I re-rolled this thing a million freaking times. But ideally, you just want a socket and intelligence. Mana regeneration is okay. It's not bad. If you can get anything else, cool. Otherwise, this is not necessarily a terrible roll. Then, Vile Hive, you want that haunt damage again. Also, you want the 60% increase, which is the max, if you can get to it, or get close enough. With the Haunting Girdle, pretty much anything that's going to give you more toughness. So, your vitality, armor, and then either percent life or regenerating life, so the life per second. But you definitely are going to have the int on there anyways. For the Traveler's Pledge and the Compass Rose, these are hard to get good rolls on, but the Traveler's Pledge here is not very bad. You want int if you can get it, but at a certain point, if you are such a high Paragon level, you probably wouldn't be watching this video anyways, but then you don't want the int on there. You want percent damage to poison, but otherwise you want crit hit chance, crit hit damage, and then a socket. And as far as the Compass Rose, this is almost impossible to get a good roll on, but I managed to get a reasonable one. So it's going to roll with movement speed every time. It always rolls with movement speed. It's so annoying. So you basically have to re-roll the movement speed to something more useful. Oftentimes it's a socket. This time I got lucky that movement speed, I got to roll to crit because I had crit hit damage already on there, and I already had a socket, which is very good. As far as the gems, by the way, we're going to roll Bane of the Trapped, Bane of Stricken, and then Esoteric Alteration. You can remove Bane of the Stricken for Bane of the Powerful, and there's a couple other ones that if you want to, but if this is really to kill the Rift Guardian, and that's basically it. And that pretty much covers the character gear. Let's actually talk about the Templar real quick. So his weapon doesn't necessarily matter. What does matter is you want him to have an Oculus Ring, which creates an area of focus power on killing monster, yada yada yada. Damage increased by 83%. It's up to 85, so that's not a bad roll while standing in the area. And then the S of Johann, which is a chance to pull enemies in. Everything else is kind of negotiable. Make sure he has the Unity if you're using Unity. Obviously, if you're playing in a group, this doesn't matter. But this shield is just super baller. It'll make sure things stay stunned. It's really nice. So that's, pretty much how he rolls. As far as the cube, if you're running Unity, then you run this ring. This is where most of our damage comes from. You deal 300% increased damage to enemies affected by both your Haunt and Locust Swarm. So you want to make sure that both of those are on there. You'll do 300% increased damage. That's 300% increased dot damage, which means 300% increased Soul Harvest. It's crazy good. You'll notice that things will just explode. Like I said, it's nuts. Now, if you aren't running Unity and you are wearing Ring of Emptiness, so say you're in a group wearing Ring of Emptiness, or you're wearing something else, then that something else could be Convention of Elements, or if you're speed farming, Avarice Band. Convention of Elements is probably the better choice here. There's a few other stuff. I like to, when speed farming, run Rachel's Ring of Larceny, because we run Horrify, which is a fear effect, so we get a speed boost. It doesn't really matter, but if you're running in a group, just make sure you have Ring of Emptiness. Anywhere, it's either on your character or in here. That's it. This is completely non-negotiable. The Helm slot here, the armor slot. Locust Swarm and Haunt now deal their damage in half the normal duration, which means that this doubles your damage. That's all it does. It effectively doubles your damage. That's easy math. There you go. Nothing else you're going to be using here. The weapon slot can change. If you have a furnace, use a furnace. If you're feeling a little squishy, and you feel like you might be able to kill elites pretty quickly in greater rifts, then change it to the Perquisition, which is a really nice damage reduction. You could change it to Ingeom if you're running speed farming too, like that's an option. You can also put Sacred Harvester in here if you're running some other weapon, but make sure that you have Vile Hive, obviously. And there's a couple other things, like if you really wanted to, speed farm and stuff like that. But generally speaking, your two options are the Furnace or the Perquisition. And that's pretty much it. So that covers the cube, that covers the character, that covers the follower, which is really important. And now let's look at the skills real quick. So if you're getting all of the runes from Soul Harvest, what does that mean? Well, you're getting Swallow Your Soul, gain mana, and increase maximum mana by 5% for each enemy harvested. So that you're scaling with density. You want as many enemies to harvest as possible. Siphon, you gain a bit of life every time you harvest an enemy. You gain armor by 10% per harvested enemy and reduce their movement speed by 80% for 5 seconds. You get Soul Wave, 5% increased movement speed for each enemy harvested. There's a cap to that. Harvested enemies also take 640% weapon damage as physical. So this is really important because your 2-piece, or rather your 4-piece Soul Harvest gains the effect of every rune and has its cooldown reduced. So, really nice. So that's where you're getting with that. Doesn't matter which one you take. I just take the poison one because I have % poison damage and I think it works that way. Haunt has a couple options. Remember how we release with our belt, we already cast 2 spirits? Well, you can make it so it casts a 3rd. It doesn't really matter, the Restful Spirits one. Consuming, basically you get life per second. Lingering Spirit, it just lasts longer when an enemy dies, so then it can cling onto another enemy, because that's what it's going to do. Draining Spirit returns 12 mana per second. That's not useful. The best one here is Haunted Damage, take 20% more damage from your attacks. And yes, this works with Soul Harvest. It's crazy good. Locust Swarm, on the other hand, because we have Pestilence on our offhand, we're going to use Cloud of Insects. The rest of them are okay, but not nearly good enough. Cloud of Insects is just the best one because we're squishy. So with Spirit Walk, you're going to use Jaunt, and this is important because you're going to be in the middle of enemies a lot, and you're just going to use your Spirit Walk to stay alive. If you're speed farming, Severance is really good just for movement speed. As far as Piranhas, because the Piranhas are amazing, you're going to use Piranhado to kind of gather enemies up. Pretty simple. That's pretty standard for most builds. And then weirdly enough, we're going to use Horrify. This is going to be used as a survivability. So we're going to gain 50% additional armor for 8 seconds after casting Horrify, and it's a fear effect. So you want to use, Rachel's Ring of Larceny. You can use that for speed farming and stuff like that. You could change this out for other stuff if you really wanted to, but this is a survivability thing. Not only does it interrupt things because it fears them and immobilizes them, but it also means that you're getting the damage reduction. So it's also very good. Finally, our passives. So Spirit Vessel is really nice because, again, we're going to take a lot of damage. We don't want to die that often because it'll set us back a ton. So Spirit Vessel will make sure that we don't. Swampland Attunement. You and your pets, we're not using any pets, gain 120 physical poison, fire, and cold resistance for every enemy within 20 yards. Again, we scale with density. We want as much density around us as possible. This will keep us alive in that situation. Grave Injustice, we already talked about this. Cooldown reduction every time you kill an enemy. It's really good. And then finally, Creeping Death. You have to have this. If you're out there and you do your Soul Harvest and you're like, what the heck? I think that should have been doing a lot more damage. I have all the set pieces. I've got everything else. Why didn't it do that? It's because you don't have Creeping Death equipped. I've done it before. Make sure it's equipped. it makes a big difference. Are there any things you can switch out here? Yes, you can switch out Swampland Attunement for Confidence Ritual, deal 25% additional damage to enemies within 20 yards. Or you could do the same thing for Spirit Vessel. It works. Nothing else really here is that good. Jungle Fortitude, Bad Medicine, that's better. You know, that's getting there. Pierce the Veil, you know, there's some things that you could switch out, but this is going to be your standard build for this. I should say, I should have said at the beginning even that I've done up to a 76 with that. Like I've completed I've done my seasonal journey. I'm done. Like I'm done with the season. That's how I play this game. I feel like this build and the Helltooth can get to an equal greater rift. But if you have fully optimized gear and you have a player who knows how to play both, that player who can play the Jade set is always going to go a bit higher than the Helltooth. And the reason for this is because the Helltooth used to be really, really overpowered. A couple days before the season started, they nerfed this. This used to work with your pets on Helltooth. So you would actually use Locust Swarm and Haunt, and then use your pets in the Helltooth set to do all your damage, because your pets are doing the damage anyways. So that's why I believe that, and statistically speaking from what I've seen as well, the Jade is just going to do slightly better as far as progressing in the rifts. So that's all of your gear. That's all of your stat priorities and stuff. Let's finish it off with Paragons, because I got a lot of requests the last guide. Basically, you get movement speed up until it's at 25% or until you're at 25% on your sheet. And then you just stack intelligence. Pretty easy. Once you hit Paragon 800, it's all intelligence anyway, so it doesn't really matter. On offense, you're going to go either crit chance or crit damage, depending on just generally where you're at on your sheet. You'll typically start at crit hit chance, then crit damage, then cooldown reduction, then attack speed. Attack speed isn't that good for us. Defense, you can kind of change it up, but basically you want to go resist all, then armor, then life regen. If you're having problems with life regen, it's not that high, go life regen up beyond life. So you would go resist all, armor, life regen, then life, if you don't have enough recovery. And then finally in utility, you're going to do life per hit, which is okay. Area damage is on par with that, so you can kind of switch them out. Depends on what you want to do, but these two are interchangeable. Then you can do resource cost reduction, then gold find. Resource cost reduction and gold find can swap out if you're just farming normal rifts or not. But there's that. Let's actually get to the gameplay, because it is incredibly difficult, but a lot of fun. So when learning how to play Jade, there are a few rules that you have to keep in mind, which the first is that Templar is the boss. And what do I mean by that? Well, remember, he's wearing the Oculus ring, but he's also wearing the S of Johann, so he's able to kind of like pull things together and also put down your little buff circle. Well, you want to look for that buff circle. It's stupidly overpowered. You want to use your Soul Harvest while inside of it, whenever possible. If you're fighting a boss, you want to stand inside of it and just throw out Haunt on them, right? Why do I say that he's the boss? Well, it's not like he's determining where it goes, but it's whatever happens with him is determining where you're fighting and how you're fighting. Now, you have to know, and this will just come from experience, when to go to the circle and when not to. Sometimes it is really dangerous to go, and you're just going to end up dying in the process. Sometimes it's not, and it will save you a lot of time by running into it. And like I said, that just boils down to experience and knowing when to run and when not to. But he is also the king because he is determining where to fight. Now, the Templar is, you can't really control it. You can manipulate him a bit, but you can't really control him, which means he's just going to walk up and start attacking things, and that's where he dies on his hill, right? He wants to fight there. And sometimes it's not the best place to fight. So sometimes you gotta like run around and get him to respawn in a little bit and then run in and attack. But that's not always efficient as far as time is concerned. So if he just runs in and just pulls a ton of things to him, remember, we scale with density. We want to fight on top of that stuff. So we're going to fight on top of our Templar. Templar is boss. That's our first rule. The second rule is knowing how to rotate out your abilities. Soul Harvest is gonna be your that's where your damage is coming from when you're clearing all this garbage before you get to the boss. So how do you rotate this out properly? Well, you want to pretty much run in. You can use your Spirit Walk, which is gonna likely be your way in and out. As you see in the background, it's kind of the way that I get in and out. And then once you're in, you throw down wherever your Templar is. Remember, Templar is boss. You throw down your piranhas, which will pull everything to him if they're not already pulled to him, right? Then you run up, you horrify. That will give you your damage reduction bonus, and it will fear them all. They won't run away, they'll stay in the same place. Remember, they're immobilized. Then you cast Haunt and Locust Swarm. Likely Locust Swarm first. Now, Locust Swarm works in a weird way. It's cast in melee, so you gotta be up close anyways, right? You're not going to be able to cast this from very far away. So you want to run up, cast Locust Swarm, then just pretty much hold down Haunt and just be casting it on everything. Just be spreading it. Once you've casted it a few times, it's already, Locust Swarm has already had enough time to spread. Then you Soul Harvest. Once you Soul Harvest, everything may just end up dying right then and there. Or it'll get really low. At that point, you're just kind of standing in there. Your Soul Harvest has given you the ton of damage reduction from it. You're getting literally all of your damage reduction from Soul Harvest. So before you even run in, you are squishy. You are really squishy, which is where the Compass Rose and Traveler's Pledge comes in, because as you're moving, you're getting the damage reduction. You know how that works. But you need to be careful running in for your very first time. That is why we use our Spirit Walk to get in and out. So we're going to run in. We're going to cast all of our stuff, then we're going to Soul Harvest. Hopefully things die. If things die, Soul Harvest will come up off of cooldown quicker, but more importantly, Spirit Walk will be off cooldown. Now, you'll notice in the background, there are times where I will run in, I will kill a ton of stuff right after, and this is key, right after Spirit Walk goes off of cooldown. So right after we're done using it, rather. Because while you are in Spirit Walk, you cannot reduce the cooldown of it, because the cooldown does not begin until Spirit Walk ends. So you want your Spirit Walk effect to end, instantly hit Soul Harvest, which will refresh the cooldown on it, because you killed a ton of things suddenly. Then you can go straight back into Spirit Walk, maybe apply a bit more Haunts. They're already reapplying themselves, because of any target that died, that Haunt will move on to a target that isn't haunted yet, which is really nice. Maybe cast Locust Swarm again, likely not. Then you Soul Harvest again, then you Soul Harvest again, then you just keep doing it until things are dead. And it's key, not necessarily to wait to use Soul Harvest. If it's on cooldown, you're doing something right. If it's not on cooldown for a long period of time, either you're not in the place where you're being able to use it, or you're not using it correctly. You want it to be on cooldown a lot, because you want a lot of things to be dying. Because the more things that are dying and the more things that are around you, the more your cooldown reduction is going to go down, and the more survivability you're going to have, and the more damage you're going to do. So everything revolves around how often you're using Soul Harvest. Now, with your Spirit Walk, you want, again, to be making sure that you're able to hit that Soul Harvest button right when Spirit Walk is done cooling down, or done being used, so that way you can get the cooldown completely off of it again and use it again. And what this does is this creates an effect that we had a few seasons ago with Spirit Walk, where you could just have it up infinitely. Well, there are a lot of situations where you're clearing the trash of these greater rifts where you do end up having it up infinitely. It just is always there for you when you do it correctly. I'm not a master at it, but this will be the difference. The people who can do this right and time this right and know exactly when to use it and when not to are going to be the people who do the Greater Rift 90 plus this season, and the people who can't get past Greater Rift 80, because they know when that damage reduction is useful and when it is not, and how to manage it. It's that management of Spirit Walk that is very, very difficult. And that's more of a advanced thing. Don't worry about that when you first start playing. You already have a million other buttons to push. You literally have like 10 more buttons to push, no joke, than the Helltooth set. So you gotta be kind of careful with that. Just focus on pushing your other buttons. Then once you get the hang of it, get used to resetting the cooldown on Spirit Walk, right? Now let's talk a little bit about when to use Horrify. And the answer is always. You always, it's just every single time it's off of cooldown, be hitting that button because that is a massive damage reduction increase. Always be hitting that. And always be holding down, whether it be a number button that you've bound it to or your mouse, always be holding down Haunt unless you need mana. If you need mana because you're out of mana to cast your Piranhas or your Locust Swarm, one, you probably haven't killed anything in a while because every time you kill things, because of our passive, we gain mana back, right? Life and mana, in fact. So if you're killing things enough, you'll never have to worry about mana. But there are situations that you will. In that case, you want to stop casting Haunt. Otherwise, you pretty much always want to be casting Haunt with moments of casting Locust Swarm again. You don't want to always be casting Locust Swarm. It's just going to drain your mana. You don't need that. You just want to cast every now and again. Like every time you come up to a new pack. Every time you start fighting a boss. You know, that kind of stuff. Every time you maybe have died and resurrected. You want to use Locust Swarm. But then for the rest of the time, you're casting Haunt, because remember, Haunt is doing damage to the targets it's already on. So you want to be just having it on everything. That being said, when you get to the Rift Guardian, your main damage output is going to be standing in those stupid little Oculus ring circles, which you're going to be doing anyways throughout the Rift, so you know that will become second nature. But then just holding down Haunt on that boss and soul harvesting when you can. On bosses that summon adds, soul harvest becomes exponentially better, but most bosses that do not summon any adds of any description, you're stuck just holding down Haunt and hitting soul harvest on cooldown. Now remember, while holding down Haunt, you're going to be getting that Soul Harvest cooldown down anyway, so you could be able to go use it, but you're not going to have that crazy damage reduction that you do normally. So Rift Guardians are a little harder with this build, but they're still possible. Make sure to use your Piranhas on it, to begin with, so that way you get the damage boost on the bosses and everything like that. But for the most part, the more that you're holding down Haunt is the more damage you're going to do because of your gem, which every single time you're doing damage with Bane of the Stricken, you're going to be increasing the amount of damage that you do to that target. So just constantly be holding down Haunt on them and be casting Locust Swarm when you can and Piranhas when you can. Otherwise, run up and Soul Harvest every time it's off of cooldown. That's how that works. That's how this build plays. It's going to take practice. Practice. Once you get used to the rotations of how everything kind of works, you won't die as much. And once you stop dying as much, you're going to clear rifts stupidly fast. And in the end, the effect that comes in here is that the game is way more fun to play than Helltooth. I like Helltooth, don't get me wrong. It's fun having pets. But that is such a passive build compared to this, where you're actually doing all the damage yourself. And you're affecting how much damage you're doing based on how well you're playing the build. So good luck trying to get it together. I believe that you can do it. It's a lot of fun. Remember that Templar is boss. Fight on your Templar. Fight where your Templar wants to fight and where he puts down the circles. Make sure that you kind of optimize your gear around Haunt damage. And with that, you'll be running through Greater Rifts in no time. It's a lot of fun. I highly suggest this build. It's the most fun I've had on a Witch Doctor ever. And with that, we shall see you guys next time.